Hello there. Hope you're doing well. Mike Shreeve here. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We're going to be talking about 3 different ways to add at least $1 million over the next 12 months with a book. Very excited for today's episode. We've got a lot to cover. Obviously, there's way more than 3 ways to use a book to help your business. You can use it in marketing and operations. It can change who your clients are. It can do a whole lot of different things. But today we're just going to focus in on using a book to do one thing and the different ways to do that one thing. And the reason that I'm focusing in on this one thing is because Peaceful Profits is uniquely positioned in the market to have an ear open to hundreds of business owners a month. So we will talk to anywhere between 200 and 300 people per month in our various sales calls, consulting calls, etc. And as a result, we get to see the difference between what the gurus are saying and what's actually happening on the ground. The most popular and influential gurus are not influential and popular because they're right. They're influential and popular because they're very good at getting attention. Now, sometimes they are right. They're not mutually exclusive, but it's just important to remember. It's important to understand that being good at being famous is not the same thing as being right. Sometimes those are mutually exclusive. And so we, as a company, are actually talking to real people with real businesses facing real struggles. Some of our calls, people are weeping. Some of our calls, people are so full of hope. Either way, we are uniquely positioned to have a beat on what's actually going on out there. And I will say, if I were to sum up what is different or what's going on, or why would you sit down and make a podcast, it's because I have noticed from now, at this point, it's thousands of calls over the past couple of years, that the selling environment has changed. And for a lot of people, they are in the wrong selling environment for their business and for their goals. Now, what do we mean by selling environment? The selling environment, and this is something I've been talking about for years. You can go listen to the old podcast episodes. The selling environment is something that was taught to me by my mentor many years ago, and it is essentially all the factors that lead up to the conversation you are having with that person, and the moment you ask for the sale is the environment that you have, whether on purpose or not, created. I'll give you a very simple example. If you approach someone else trying to pitch them, that is a very different selling environment than somebody coming to you asking about your services. It's the same offer. You are the same person. You might even be using the same tactics, but those are 2 unbelievably different environments. Now, that's a very simple take on it. And the actual control you have over your selling environment is significantly more complex and nuanced than I think anyone's talking about. Everyone's always focused on the tactics and the strategies, and when you get on the phone, here's how to close. But they don't talk about how do you set it up so that when you get on the phone, by the time you get on the phone, or if you even have to get on the phone, what you're getting on the phone about, who you're getting on the phone with, what number of phone call is this? Nobody talks about any of that stuff because that requires tact and skill. And frankly, it's not as entertaining. It doesn't seem as simple and straightforward. It's not a junk food piece of business advice that feels good to hear and you feel like your business is saved because you heard it. And then most people don't ever do anything about it. And so they just go from junk food to junk food, snacking their way, just trying to make themselves feel better, which is just being a human. That's not a dig on anyone. That's just managing your own emotions and your mind and all that kind of good stuff. But today we're going to actually talk about how to change your selling environment using a book. I would say I've now been in the business of selling stuff online. 2027 will be my 20th year. And I will say of all the different tactics I've tried, webinars and VSLs and email lists and this and the socials and the videos and the podcasts and the everything. Nothing has been more effective in changing the selling environment than having a book. And so today I want to talk to you about 3 of many different ways that your selling environment will change if you have a book. And so if you're considering writing one, or you're in the middle of writing one, or you have written one and now you're, what do I do with this thing to maximize the return? This is exactly where I would start, right? Okay, so everything we're going to be talking about, the 3 different things we're going to be talking about, changing your selling environment. The 3 things that we're going to be talking about is changing your conversation dynamics, having more social proof than your business could reasonably generate, and getting into the intellectual property business. So the first one, changing your conversion dynamics. As I said, most advice right now is you have this struggling business owner, or maybe they're not struggling, they just want to grow much more than they are now. And the advice is almost always the same. Raise your price, do more of the thing that works, improve your sales process, do this type of funnel, do this kind of content. And that's tactical. And for a lot of people, it's helpful. But it's not going to generate, and for a lot of people, that's helpful, but it's not going to generate the kind of outsized returns that most people are looking for when compared to this fundamental shift. So most of the challenges you are experiencing in your sales process, in your selling environment, in your sales cycle, in your sales conversations, in your conversion rate, is a result of the fact that you are talking to strangers. That's where most of the struggle and the challenge comes from. Everything you're doing in sales or marketing is trying to essentially fight against the fact that you're talking to strangers. Here's the fundamental shift that a book can provide, which, if you have experience selling stuff and you really sit down and think about this, will provide for you an outsized return, and it is just stop talking to strangers and shift your business to talking to fans. That's it. That's the shift. Now, how do you do that? This is where the tactics of getting books into hands of strangers and letting the book do the relationship building, letting the book shift the relationship from stranger to fan, making sure that you have a book that is good enough for somebody to become a fan through the book, etc., etc. That is the shift. So instead of trying to focus on 15, 20, 30 different elements of the sales process, marketing process, build out this huge team, do all this, just shift the conversation dynamic from speaking with strangers to speaking with fans. Now, a little bit of advice. Please don't make this shift overnight. It takes adjustment. It takes time. You may have right now, for example, a VSL that does 200 to 300 sales calls per month. It takes more than a couple days for a book to replace 200 to 300 sales calls per month. However, doing it will fundamentally change your selling environment. Now, when you change the conversation dynamics and you start talking to friends instead of strangers, all of the other advice that people have been giving to you will happen naturally. Your sales conversions will go up without you having to drastically change your sales approach. Your price will naturally raise. Now, what do I mean by naturally raise? It gets to a point where you're talking to fans after fans, and enough of them are saying, wow, that's a lot less than I thought it was going to be. Or, wow, what a great deal. And you start hearing that enough, and you're like, okay, I got to raise my price. So it's great to hear, and it feels good, but after a certain point, you realize you're undercharging. And most people, you can tell them to raise their price, but they need to hear from their prospects, oh, this is underpriced, before they'll actually do it. When you're talking to strangers, don't say that, even if they think it. What a stranger thinks is, oh, I got a good deal. I'm not going to say anything. What a fan says is, I love your work. This is so great. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad this is affordable. This is way less than what I thought it was going to be. You genuinely get different feedback because of the nature of the relationship that you have with the person that you're talking to. The conversation changes from, for example, a stranger coming to you and saying, "Prove to me that I should buy from you." Prove it. Pitch me. Impress me. That kind of dynamic, to a fan coming to you after having read the book, fallen in love with you, fallen in love with your ideas, saying, "Can you just tell me what to do? I trust you enough to come to you and say, please help." Very different dynamic. Trust is pre-built before the sale. So for a lot of people right now in today's market, especially, remember, I'm essentially making this podcast because of what we've just found in all of our thousands of sales calls at this point. And no one seems to be addressing this, but some people have called it the trust recession, and there's an erosion of trust, and there's all this stuff. And whether that is or isn't true, what I can tell you is that most business owners are just tired of having to fight against people being so skeptical. Whether there's more of it now or not, I've not seen any study to very genuinely prove it or not, but that isn't even the point. If you're tired of having to deal with people who are skeptical, stop talking to skeptical people. It doesn't matter what the market's doing. Just make the change in your business so that you're no longer talking to skeptical people. How do you do that? This is changing the conversation dynamic. This is stop talking to strangers and start talking to fans. And a book is a really nice, compact way of getting people to shift on their own from stranger to fan. Because think about it, a good book, let's say you turn it into an audiobook, for example, the One Book Millions method, my book, 7.5 hours the audiobook is. That means if somebody listens to the audiobook from start to finish, they'll have spent 7.5 hours with me. And I can do that 1,000 times a month, selling 1,000 copies a month. That's 1,000 it's 1,000 7.5 hour conversations in 30 days. Now, when you do something like that, you also change the supply and demand curve. So this is Econ 101. This is something that I've been talking about. Again, you can go back to a lot of my old podcast episodes, especially when we talk a lot more about business type stuff than just book type stuff. You'll hear me talk about supply and demand all the time. There are real and genuine market forces that work on both the macro and microeconomic levels. One of those is the supply and demand curve. If you can increase demand for your time and your supply of you stays the same, price will naturally increase because the market will compete for what you have for sale. This is Econ 101 stuff, right? This is what you first learn in the first 2 or 3 weeks of a college level economics class. This isn't some high level business stuff. And yet, very few people talk about it. Let me just give you some actual realistic examples here. Okay, so let's take the audiobook example. You get this book into the hands of 1,000 people every month. It's 7.5 hours long. What do we mean by demand going up? What do we mean by supply staying the same, etc.? This is, if you've never experienced this, it's so hard to describe. And I've spent 20 years describing things for a living as a copywriter, as a ghostwriter, nonfiction author, as a fiction author under several pen names. I still have not been able to find great words for describing this shift. The shift from speaking to a stranger to speaking to a friend could be summed up like this. A stranger has almost no desire for you to win the sales conversation. A fan desperately wants the sales conversation to work out. That is the difference between a low demand conversation and a high demand conversation. It plays out in a couple of ways. For example, talking to strangers, typically you'll see in your KPIs a low show-up rate. That is measurable impact, measurable data proving that there just isn't a lot of demand from that quote unquote market. Now, let's identify the word market, or let's define it very quickly. In this case, it's just your market are the people who are willing to talk to you. That's your market. There is no such thing as the market where you're trying to identify a group of 1 million people who, no, your market is your market. My market is a different market than your market. Although we may have some crossover if you're a competitor of mine. Some of the people who have talked to me might have also talked to you. But my market is the 200 or 300 people who book a sales call with us every month. That's my market. Your market is the group of people who interact with you and your stuff. The demand of that market can be seen in, for example, show rates. It can be seen in close rates. You measure the number of calls you've had and you say, oh my gosh, only 8% of these people want to buy something from me. Switch to speaking to fans. They'll show up on time. They like you. They want to have a conversation with you or your team or whatever. They're bought into your stuff. The demand is not just this ethereal thing that nobody can measure. You can actually measure it in KPIs. Your conversion rates are higher. Why? Did you get better at selling? No. They wanted it before they even booked the call. So demand is actually measurable in KPI. And the difference between your KPIs under the conversation with a stranger versus your KPIs under the conversation with a friend are drastically different. And if you've never experienced it before, I hope you get to someday. It is tremendous. It's really tremendous. It fixes a lot of the business math that people are struggling with right now. Everyone's saying ads are expensive. Ads are expensive to strangers, yes. They're very expensive. Why? Because the demand is low. So for every dollar you spend, not much of that dollar is returned because there's just not a lot of demand behind it. They're not very reactive to it. They're take it or leave it. I don't know. We'll sign up and we'll see if we show up and whatever. Not true with fans. Ad costs are still unbelievably cheap for marketing to fans because fans show up more. They see one of your ads and they're excited about it. They buy more of your stuff, etc. So you want to add $1 million to your business over the next 12 months. Stop talking to strangers. Let the book talk to the strangers. You talk to fans or your sales team or whatever the core sort of conversion mechanism is that you have. You want to make a webinar work that hasn't worked in a really long time? Fill it full of people who've read your book and you'll think you're the best webinar presenter the world has ever seen. And this is the thing. A lot of these gurus, when they're posting about their big wins and their big numbers, ask them about their audience mix. I would bet every penny in my pocket that the big numbers they show are people who already were fans. And that's the difference between them and you, is that they just have probably more than one fan-making mechanism. You can make fans on YouTube. You can make fans on podcasts. You can make fans on social media. You can make fans on all sorts of different ways. A book just happens to be a nice one-off project that you just set up and it works for you. So for example, you could definitely go make a bunch of fans on YouTube, but what do you have to do with YouTube? You have to make new videos all the time and they got to be really good. And you got to really, a book, you just write it once and then you set it up on ad-based systems or simple marketing systems and then you don't have to do anything again, right? I've got a book from 2019 that still brings in phone calls. Haven't had to touch it since then. That's the difference. Okay, but it's just a fan-making mechanism. All right, so that's the first way. All right, so we're only our first way through. We're at 20 minutes in or so. Apologies if you haven't listened to an episode of mine, which, by the way, I haven't made an episode in 2 years. If you haven't listened to an episode of mine, they get pretty long and windy and winded. Hopefully, this has been helpful. Let's go now to number 2, more social proof than your business could reasonably generate. What do we mean by that? You look at your competitors and you look at yourself, odds are you think to yourself, I could probably use some more social proof. Okay, whether we're talking to fans or whether we're talking to strangers, everybody needs more social proof. The problem with most of the businesses that we talk to is that their business environment, their selling environment is, hello stranger, buy this really expensive thing. As a result, only a very small portion of their market ever even gets to try them out and become eligible to be someone who eventually leaves a testimonial or case study or whatever. In other words, if you sell something for $10,000, $20,000, $100,000, there's not very many people that you'll talk to who will ever be able to afford that, have the money, etc. It has nothing to do with the value of your offer, your sales skills, whatever. It's just out of 100 people, not all 100 of them are going to pay $10,000 for something. So as a result, your business, if that's your business setup, running a cold VSL to something very expensive or some version of that content to something expensive, whatever, you just don't have that many transactions. And if we're looking for testimonials or case studies or social proof from a transaction, then we can reasonably use basic business math and say, okay, if we have fewer transactions than the number of people who are coming to talk to us, our market, and then of those transactions, not everybody leaves a testimonial for whatever reason. It's usually a smaller percentage of those total transactions. We're talking about a small percentage of a small percentage of a small percentage. So you're just not going to generate this big windfall of case studies, testimonials, etc. So when somebody comes to your page or comes to your whatever website, whatever, you don't have that many, and it's difficult to compete, especially with strangers in this world of everybody has a lot of options and they just want to feel safe in their purchase. So what do? Do you just have to wait until you have the same volume of transactions as your competitor who's been in business 10 years longer than you? And the answer is no. Just use a book, because you can sell a book for $5, $20 to 1,000 people, and they can leave you a testimonial of social proof of picture of them with the book, picture of them, maybe you upsell some merch like shirts, whatever. They make a video about it. They talk about it. There's all sorts of things you can do. You can set up full-on affiliate campaigns for selling your book. You can do content-based affiliate campaigns where you have 1,000 people making 1,000 videos every month about you and your stuff, and they make a bunch of money selling your book, and et cetera, and et cetera. There's 100 different ways you can implement this idea, but the idea is that you introduce an incredibly low ticket transaction into your business, which allows you the opportunity to ask for a testimonial. And what you then have is and you don't have to change anything else in your business. You can still only work with a handful of people every month paying you $10,000 or more, or whatever your business model is. You don't have to change that part where you're only getting 1 or 2 case studies a quarter because you just don't work with that many people. But now you're getting several thousand potential testimonial givers from your book sales. And then, like I said, there's all sorts of different ways you can affiliate. You can do TikTok, the Hudson method, if you're familiar with that. There's all sorts of different things that you can do to essentially blow up the size of your social proof profile to, like I said, a level, so more social proof than your business could reasonably generate. In other words, you look way more impressive than you'll ever be able to achieve one client at a time. Now, some caveats here. This is not to be used dishonestly. You're not asking book readers to leave testimonials about a service that they haven't gotten. But you are asking them for testimonials on the ideas in the book, on the systems in the book, on the framework in the book, on the stories in the book. You are asking them to rate you and the transaction. And this is all testimonials. This is all social proof that you can stack and stack on top of whatever client testimonials you have. And now you look like a big, wonderful, very trustworthy, someone who everybody wants to do business with kind of business, because you were able to extend beyond the math that you currently have, which doesn't math out to a lot of client testimonials, etc. There's a lot of business teachers and gurus who talk about starting a movement. Don't just start a business, start a movement. Really hard to do if your minimum ticket size is like $10,000, because you just don't have enough people bought in. To start a movement, you need volume. There's a reason that manifestos start movements and free pamphlets start movements, not $10,000 dinners. It's because you need to be able to give people a chance to transact with you so they can rate that transaction in public, and then you can just get thousands of those over time. So it's, again, we're changing the selling environment so that even if a stranger comes to us, they're going to see, oh, this person has done thousands of transactions. They're trustworthy. Now, add on top of that, just the fact that it's a fan now seeing all of this social proof. And what's that social proof going to do? It's just going to affirm what they already believe about you. Now, the cool thing is that testimonials from a book also are way easier to get than testimonials from a high ticket thing. You can entirely automate a testimonial from a book, whereas a meaningful testimonial from a client, for example, probably requires some kind of video, audio, etc. type experience to be believable, right? Somebody pays you $10,000 and they leave you a 2-sentence review. For a lot of people, that's actually worse than no social proof at all. It looks maybe not real. It's like, man, for $10,000, they only had 2 sentences to say about you. So you need the more long form social proofing, the higher your thing is. Not true with a testimonial. You have 1,000 people saying, oh my gosh, the ideas in this book were amazing, whatever, the author's amazing, this changed my life, etc., etc. That's appropriate for that size of transaction. And so you can stack those. Again, a whole wall. Just imagine on your website, a whole wall of people praising you and your ideas. And if the book is about the thing that you sell or tied to the thing you sell, or about you and your ideas, whatever it's consulting, coaching, professional services, whatever, you're a lawyer who writes a book, how to make sure your divorce goes smoothly. And it's just 1,000 testimonials of people saying, this book saved my life. This attorney put the knowledge in here that helped me to this and helped me to that and helped me to this and helped me to that. Somebody who's about to have a phone call with you and they see that 1,000 different reviews and testimonials of just of the book, that is undeniable social proof that the person they're about to talk to knows what the heck they're talking about and knows how to help people. And it's, like I said, the word is undeniable. And that's the kind of proof that I think people want to have. Again, whether the market is or isn't more skeptical doesn't matter. It matters what kind of selling environment you want. Do you want to be talking to skeptical people? Most people would say no. Okay, there's things you can do about that. And having a book is one of those things that you can do. Applying the book like this is one way. And just imagine, however you're currently getting calls on your calendar, however you're currently selling your thing, just imagine if you had a wall of proof before anyone was allowed to even think about talking to you, stranger or fan. Now, this is also, by the way, a little side note here, there's also a really good way to get testimonials if you happen to offer something where your core thing is too embarrassing for someone to admit they bought and or be willing to share an open testimonial about. Peaceful Profits is a very good example. For almost all of our clients, we sign an NDA saying we will never tell anyone that we helped you with your book. And a lot of our author clients don't want anyone to know that we helped them with their book. I don't personally agree with the stigma of having people help you with a book, because publishing has always been that way. That's why there are managing editors and acquisition editors and copy editors and line editors and proofreaders. And every book in the history of traditional publishing has had a team behind it. But I understand that there are a lot of clients who just would not feel comfortable letting it be known that they hired us to help them with their book. Cool. Been in the business for 20 years. It doesn't hurt my feelings whatsoever. But you might have a similar type of client base where, on the one hand, you need people to know that you know what you're talking about. You need people to be able to trust you because of the very nature of the thing that you do. Again, same with us. People need to trust that this is like their baby. A lot of people take writing a book like it's one of the most important things in their entire life. It's a massive moment in their life, and they need to be able to trust us enough to put down the amount of money it costs to hire us, because we aren't cheap. If you're in that same exact scenario, book reviews are a way for you to stack social proof in a way that you don't even have to stress anymore about that dynamic. It's no longer a dynamic that's holding you back. It levels the playing field with everybody else who maybe, for example, they're not afraid to break client confidentiality, or they make it a requirement or whatever. And you look at your competitors and you're like, I'm just not willing to be like that. I'm not willing to do it that way, but I'm suffering because I don't have the social proof that they do. And so now I'm in this weird dynamic, and this is not the selling environment I want to be in. This is one of the ways that you can fix that and stay totally ethically clear. Don't manipulate the testimonials. Don't trick people into thinking that a book review is the same thing as a review of your services, but you can still stack the proof. And it's really nice to have a selling environment in which people cannot deny you do a good job. They just can't make up the objection that you do a good job because the proof is overwhelming. All right, so that's number 2. So we've gone through change your conversation dynamics, and we have gone through more social proof than your business could reasonably generate. Now I want to talk about something that's very exciting. Remember, the whole purpose of today's episode is 3 ways to add $1 million next year with a book. We've talked a lot about changing the selling environment by changing the conversation from stranger to friend, undeniable proof, way more than seems even reasonable for the transaction volume that you do now. Now we're going to talk about something which is, it's a very old concept. It was made popular and then people forgot about it by Rich Dad Poor Dad, the 4 quadrants of wealth creation, one of those quadrants being intellectual property. So many of the ultra wealthy that you think make most of their money from, say, products are in fact intellectual property companies that use products to, I wouldn't say lazily because they do a lot of work, but they use products to distribute that intellectual property. But even then, the big majority of their revenue comes from the intellectual property itself, not even the products they create to share the intellectual property. Let's dive into it. This is not meant to be a masterclass in intellectual property, but I just want to show you how a book is step 1 in today's world of being an expert, being a professional, being a coach, a consultant, a lawyer, a doctor, whatever. A book is step 1 to getting your feet wet in the intellectual property business. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years. There is no business, in my opinion, better than the intellectual property business. It is incredible. All right. So let me just get rid of some misnomers here. And this is going to hurt some feelings, and I'm really sorry, but somebody has got to say it because there are a lot of people being misled right now. A coaching program or consulting services is not intellectual property. Most coaching programs I see have no framework. They have no trademark. What they're selling is not trademarkable. There's no system. There's no productization of the information. It is completely indefensible in the way that it's packaged, legally indefensible, and etc. Now, I am not saying that there are not exceptions to this rule. I am saying the vast majority of people who have not purposely gone through the process of turning their coaching or consulting programs into intellectual property do not have the intellectual property asset that they think they have. And ironically, it wouldn't take too much more effort to turn it into the most profitable type of business, which is the intellectual property business. But it doesn't happen on accident. Just making a program does not. It's like the Michael Scott. I think of this all the time. If you remember The Office years ago, Michael Scott, he has to claim bankruptcy. Oscar, the accountant, walks him through what he needs to do. Then he walks into the office or whatever, and he just goes, I claim bankruptcy, because he thinks that claiming bankruptcy is just going out and saying, I claim bankruptcy. Same kind of thing. That's not exactly how intellectual property works. You can't just say it and then all of a sudden you have all these rights. There are things you have to do to make it defensible. And here at Peaceful Profits, we spend significantly more time than most of our competitors focused on defensible intellectual property, not just loosely termed intellectual property. But let me give you some ideas here, and then I'll explain specifically why a book is key. If I were to look back over the past 20 years and I think of who my smartest clients were, here's some examples of my smartest clients. So I had one client who did a corporate license deal. So he got a $550,000 check up front, no silly side terms where it was like a 12-month earnout and this and that. It was just a $550,000 check written from a huge corporation, and my client had to do nothing. He had to do nothing for it. What they paid $550,000 for is they just wanted to license his intellectual property, not even all of his intellectual property. So they did not buy ownership of his IP. They simply bought a license to use elements of the intellectual property that he created for their training programs. So when training their new hires, they wanted to use elements of what he had created, he had trademarked, what he had owned, and they paid him $550,000 for it. Why? Because to the corporation, it was worth how many millions and millions in being able to uptrain their new hires faster than if they had tried to even build out the same training themselves. Another client, this one was genius. I love this one. This client was able to strike a deal with a sort of small startup where they put her intellectual property into their software. And now, again, she doesn't have to do anything for this. She now collects money for every install of the software. So every time this software is installed, and it's installed a lot, she gets a cut of it. She gets a piece of it, basically like a little royalty, because it's her intellectual property guiding a significant portion of the software. She didn't have to go meet with them and work on incorporating the intellectual property. They did all the work. They just wanted to use that intellectual property to make their software better. I've seen a lot of equity for IP deals. For example, you would get a portion of the company. They'll do all the work. What they just want to use is your intellectual property. For whatever reason, maybe they just use it in their marketing. Maybe they use it as part of their core offering. Maybe they use it for whatever, to develop other stuff, and you get equity as a part of that. Now, you may have seen quite a lot of buzz about consulting for equity. That is the lower version of IP for equity. The real big move, the real ultra wealthy move, is exchanging the intellectual property itself. Literally no sweat for the equity to be able to potentially have a tremendous upside. If you've ever been interested in, or you even have, or you would like to in the future, you've heard of things like certification programs. So for example, maybe you have a very unique and powerful way that you can use yoga for healing bad knees or something, let's just say. People then could pay to be certified in your methodology, paid to be certified in your practice, paid to be certified in the way that you do things. That's all just code word mumbo jumbo for intellectual property. They're paying to access your intellectual property, and you have created a certification program based off of that intellectual property, which you can then go license people, give people a license to practice this specific type of yoga which helps knees or whatever, and then they can go and set up their own shops or integrate it into their own thing or whatever, right? And this is true for all sorts of different things and all sorts of different industries and all sorts of different, et cetera. Obviously, consult attorneys to make sure that you're even legally allowed to do it, et cetera, and in certain either markets or certain types of things, they may need some kind of additional, say, federal licensing or whatever. But the point is, a certification program of any type is just an intellectual property licensing deal, business, whatever you want to call it, model. That's all it is. It's just the intellectual property game. Another one, territory licenses. So let's say, for example, you have a unique way of selling real estate that works really well, and you know how to get good leads and you know how to close them. Maybe you specialize in the really fancy houses, and you could walk right into somebody's real estate business and brokerage or whatever, and you could say, look, I know how to get you more of these deals, but I don't want to consult. I don't want to do anything. I'm just going to give you this intellectual property, and you can license it, and it will have the tools, it will have the training, it will have everything you need. And I'm going to license it for this territory right here. I'm talking to 3 of your competitors. Whoever wants it first can have it, and you can be the single holder of this license for this entire territory. That's the intellectual property business. Then you just go to the next territory, and then you go to the next territory, and then you go to the next territory. And they're essentially renting your intellectual property. And if they stop paying, then you just sell it to their competitor. Intellectual property, it's as good as it gets. 20 years I've been doing this. I've not found anything better than being in the intellectual property business in terms of upside. Okay? Now, here's why a book helps you to do all of this. So a lot of people think that writing a book is just about capturing your stories, capturing your voice, capturing your whatever. And frankly, a lot of my competitors, that's what they focus on. They'll say legacy, they'll say voice capture, they'll say we have really good writers. At Peaceful Profits, what we focus on is creating defensible intellectual property. So how do we do it? There's a couple ways that we do that. One is helping you to come up with that intellectual property. I think most of the people who come to us say, I've got a lot of ideas. Great. That's where you start. But you have to take those ideas and then turn them into intellectual property. For example, turning them into a framework. A lot of the work that we do is taking what seem like random ideas and turning them into step-by-step repeatable frameworks. That's like the core of intellectual property. Again, let's say you want to do the territorial licensing thing for real estate. You know that you know how to sell, but maybe you've never actually sat down and plotted each element out. Writing a book requires you to do that, because you can't just write a book and say, I don't know, I just do this, I just do that. People will be like confused in the book. It's not a very good book. So the actual act of writing a book, part of that process is getting the ideas organized in a way that makes sense. The way that we do that is called a framework, and then we write the book around your framework. Then you just take that framework, and you put it into a product called a book. And by putting that framework into a product and then doing the legal process like trademarking, etc., you have now staked your claim legally on that intellectual property. Why? Because the book, the product, it's now out in the public domain. You put it on Amazon, you list it, you sell it, you stake your claim. You say on June 1st, 2026, I was the one who came up with this framework. You can see, here's my book, it's trademark. It literally gives you defensible intellectual property. And this is the thing that everyone says, write a book, leave your legacy. I absolutely agree with that. I don't know if there's a better way to leave a legacy of your stories, of who you are, of what you've worked on, of what you've built, of the contribution you can make to the world through your ideas and your thoughts. I genuinely don't know if there's a better way to do that than a book. However, to actually leave a legacy beyond, say, for example, your passing, which in my opinion, the best legacies are the ones that continue to give after somebody has passed on. The way that you do that and to secure the legacy is to make sure that it is defensible, legally defensible intellectual property. I cannot tell you the times that I have in 20 years in the publishing business seen people not set that up correctly, and that intellectual property lose a significant amount of value, whether that's financial value or otherwise, because once that person passed on, it was quite easy for people to jump in and claim ownership over certain ideas, claim ownership over frameworks, and just it's a real mess for the people who are left behind. And look, this is not new. I did not invent this. Think about Mickey Mouse and Walt Disney. Now, a lot of people criticize Disney for how much time, energy, and effort they spend on protecting their intellectual property. And you can criticize them too. It's absolutely within your right. Or maybe and also you can learn the lesson and you can listen and notice. As my very first mentor said, success leaves clues. You can really start to think about your business, think about your life, think about what you've worked on, think about what you've built, and start thinking, how can you set yourself up for a proper legacy that is legally defensible and that leaves behind this intellectual property business potential for yourself and for the people that you care about. One of the best things that ever happened to me in my career is that, so Jim Rohn was my first mentor in this way. So I was homeless in 2007. I went to the public library, Multnomah County Library in Portland. The librarians turned me on to writing. They helped me. I got to use the public computers there. I started iWriter.com, if anybody remembers the internet that far back. And I was like churning out articles for $5 a day. And in between, to give my brain a break, I would watch YouTube, and for whatever reason, stumbled on some Jim Rohn stuff way, way back then. And I don't even know if it was YouTube, actually. It might have just been some kind of independent video hosting site, or maybe I even bought it or something. I don't even remember how I accessed it specifically, but I accessed Jim Rohn in 2007. In 2016, I was invited by Success Magazine, who owned the rights to Jim Rohn's property, who had paid a pretty penny and continued to pay the Jim Rohn family for rights to sell and resell the Jim Rohn catalog. And I got to work through Success Magazine on the Jim Rohn catalog, the very person who helped to get me off the streets through his intellectual property, through the seminar recordings and ebooks and things like that. I got to work on doing several $1 million worth of sales of his stuff. That was a full circle for me. Also with Success Magazine, I got to work on the John Wooden project. I got to meet the John Wooden family. Again, they were able to do this. We did this big launch with John Wooden. A bunch of that money went to the family. It was a really good chance for me to see how to do legacy properly. Not just to talk about it, not just to put it in in a marketing slogan, we do legacy, but to actually see it in action. And I am telling you, if I have a single goal in my own personal business life, it is to also leave a similar legacy for my family, because I've seen what can happen if you have legally defensible intellectual property. So anyways, this is why working with people to get a book done is a good idea. Having somebody turn your ideas into frameworks, having a partner. Again, traditional publishing has had this in place forever and ever. If you want to go down this road, peacefulprofits.com/call. We'd love to chat with you. No pressure environment here for us. We talk to 200-300 people a month, and we cannot take anywhere close to that number of clients. So there's no pressure from us to close on anything. But again, that's peacefulprofits.com/call. Quick review of what we talked about here today. If you want to add $1 million over the next year with a book, the first place to start is to change your selling environment. Stop operating in a system that you have created, whether you created it on purpose or created it accidentally just because you didn't know any better. Stop operating in an environment where you are at a disadvantage. Change the dynamics of your selling environment. I recommend that by changing your conversation dynamics. So stop talking to strangers, talk to people who are fans. How do you do that? Have them read your book. And talk to the people who read your book, because they will love your ideas. They will love you. They will love what you're doing. Completely changes the sales environment, that in and of itself. The other thing, get more social proof than your business could reasonably generate by reducing the transaction size into something that's way more scalable. So you can scale the transaction itself, and you can scale the testimonial collection itself, because nobody expects some 90-minute client case study video off of a $4.95 transaction, $19 transaction. And then lastly, use the book to get into the intellectual property business. And you can do amazing things with intellectual property, not just now, but as a legacy move as well. All right, that's it, my friends. Again, peacefulprofits.com/call. We'd love to talk to you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I will see you in the next one.